Okay, so today's topic is managing natural areas during difficult economic times. Obviously a timely topic for right now. My name's Steve Manning. I'm with Invasive Plant Control. I will kind of go into the details of who I am and what I do as we kind of go along through the talk today, but just in brief, Invasive Plant Control Inc. is a company that's been working very specifically on invasive species management in natural areas for about 17 years now. And that's the business that I'm with. And we send crews out and we do a lot of the very selective work in natural areas to control invasives. So a lot of the clients we work with have a lot of problems, not just invasive plants. So we're going to kind of jump on that today. And I think the first really obvious thing that we have to look at is how the debt that we have in this country really affects us and the things that we have. And I think we all felt it firsthand a couple months ago with the sequestration, the loss of jobs, the budgets that were not there, the budgets that still are not there. And if you just look at this national debt calculator, which is kind of interesting to look at. In fact, let me just end that really quickly and show it to you live here online. It's kind of interesting. Go to usdebtclock.org and you can see the way it looks. This was on this day in 2000. You can see how it was calculating in the year 2000. If you look up here in the left corner, the U.S. national debt was $5.6 trillion back then. Move up to, let's see, where do we want to go? Let's move up to 2008. Jumped up to 10.6 trillion. And then today, if we just go to 2013, watch the clock here. Watch the money as it grows. This is going up by the thousands, the hundreds of thousands, as we're just talking right now. Our debt increases that much. So we look back and we start to wonder, where's our problem coming from? This certainly is a big part of it. Take this off of our national scene, take it to our household. If this was my home and I had $100,000 in debt and it just kept growing, it'd be very hard to get out of it. We'd have to make a lot of tough choices. So whether we're in business, whether we work for the government, whether we work for anyone, or we're just talking about ourselves, we have to find ways to manage things during times that are like this. So that's kind of the place we're starting from today. So there's significant challenges the industry that we're in, the environmental industry, faces. And I would say a big part of that is survival. And when we're thinking about survival, you know, this could last for 20 years. It could last for 100 years. I don't know which, you know, we have about 150 participants on today. So out of those 150 people from a lot of different organizations, you all have different issues you're dealing with. In my case, it's often invasive species work. So we're dealing with a lot of prevention, early detection, rapid response, on-the-ground control, restoration, monitoring. But at the end of the day, it really boils down to funding. Who's going to be paying the bills to do the work that needs to be done? And if the work is not getting paid for, how are we going to manage what we consider very sensitive, very important natural areas when we don't necessarily have money to do that with? I'll say this to start. It's nothing new. We're in an industry right now that I can say that in my lifetime, I can't remember when I've heard anyone in the environmental industry tell me I've got exactly the budget I need right now. I think we're in an industry that's always been able to exist off of funds that are lower than they actually need. There's never a budget. There's very rarely budgets that people really need. And if they're there, they're temporary. They might be 1 or 2 years, and then the money's gone. It's not like, it's interesting how you can take an area that gets mowed, and it can have a budget that's consistent from year to year. But when we take an area where we need to protect the forest, where there's a rare endangered species, the money might not be there. So we've been spending a lot of time over the years using end-of-year funds to do projects, using makeshift budgets, and in many cases cannibalizing other project budgets in order to get the work done and we need to get done in our natural areas. So just very briefly here, I'm not going to sit here and read through each of these. We're going to kind of go through some of this today, preparations that I think we can all take for a downturn in the economy, from choosing your battles wisely to seeking alternative funding. So first of all, choose your battles wisely. Being our biggest challenge, the funding, we have to think of the most obvious solutions. And I'll tell you this, up front, I'm going to probably talk a lot about some of the options that are there for invasive species work in natural areas. But as we go through the presentation, it's going to evolve more into a broad spectrum of natural areas activities. But when we're talking about invasive species work and we're talking about choosing the right battles, if we don't have funding, the best thing we can do is think about prevention. Now, we can certainly do that if we're talking about other areas of this industry as well. EDRR is early detection rapid response. A lot of this jargon comes from the fire management industry as well, so certainly goes into another area of natural areas management. But ultimately, we want to choose the most efficient and effective control mechanisms. So what is your natural area battle? Mine might be invasive species. Maybe you're there to protect water quality. Maybe it's to prevent pollution. Maybe you are part of that fire management spectrum. Maybe it's managing trees, or maybe it's safety in natural areas. Or maybe you're the ones that are out there trying to manage our sensitive wildlife. Whatever your battle is, we need to put the systems in place that work even if you or the funding is not there. So the first thing that I always have to look at is prevention. It's kind of the most obvious low funding solution. If we can prevent something from happening in the first place that might be a detriment to our situation, it's going to put us in a much better spot when the funding has disappeared. One of the most important prevention techniques is education. Recently passed away Nelson Mandela notes that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Shakespeare said, "Wisely and slow, they stumble that run fast." We have to think slow. We have to be wise about what we're doing. We have to plan ahead. Prevention for invasive species might be that education being the most important. Educating the younger generation, educating as many segments of the society as we can so that people are no longer purchasing certain types of plants, so that people are actually getting out and doing the work themselves on the ground. It might be putting vehicle wash systems around lake areas so that when boats come in and out of the lake, there's no invasive species attached to them. It might be weed-free forage. It might be certified seed. We can go on and on about prevention techniques. But ultimately, investing in prevention, as you can see from this simple chart, the cost stays down significantly if we can hit prevention early enough. If we can't, we do the early detection rapid response, we can still keep our costs down. But if we miss both of those, we're going to be dealing with a much higher cost. For instance, great example here in Washington, D.C. When this lawnmower is traveling down Rock Creek and it's cutting the lawns and it has Japanese stiltgrass growing on top of it, when this grass is seeding, it's dropping seed everywhere it goes. And obviously underneath this carriage, there's a lot of seed being mowed in these areas, and it just moves it all the way down the line. That can be easily prevented with wash systems or wash programs. Again, the boat idea. Maybe it's preventing the spread of aquatic weeds by having signs. It could be as simple as signage, or when you buy your registration, part of the fees that you have to pay for this registration with go towards managing your natural area as well. In Florida right now, it's a big deal, the pythons and the other invasive snakes that are in the Everglades. Education, put up the billboards, put up the signs, teach people now so we don't have to pay the cost later. It might be construction. There's a lot of scenarios you can think of in this natural area in Arlington, Virginia, but ultimately, what are they doing here? How are they going to keep erosion from happening? How are they going to keep the general public from messing this up? How are they going to keep them from tracking invasive species in and out of this area? How are they going to keep from bringing in other invasive plants in the soils and the sands and the rock and whatever they're bringing in to work on this construction site? They have to be aware of that. That allows them to prevent the problems from happening. Might be certified forage in restricted areas. If we take this bale of hay with all this garlic mustard that's growing around it, and we take it off this site at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and we take it to another site, we've effectively transplanted garlic mustard to another site. So we have to be very aware of what we're doing and make the plans that will allow us to prevent things from happening. So if we're unsuccessful in prevention, again, we need to jump into our early detection rapid response. Now, I'm talking about invasive species, but I really want you to think of this in a lot of other ways that you manage your natural areas. One thing you can do is there's a lot of good apps out there now that allow you to detect the distribution of certain species that are on the environment. So we can get the general public involved here at very low cost by using these different apps that are out there. We just have to market the apps and teach them about it. Follow a 7-step approach to building EDRR. Again, this presentation is being recorded, so you don't have to write all this down. You'll be able to get on. If you want to look at something like this 7-step approach, it'll be available for you. There's a lot of different groups out there that are utilizing these different apps like the invasive plant councils, the exotic pest plant councils, the National Wildlife Refuges. Jump on their websites, you'll find these things. You can help them out. You can actually, if you're an individual that doesn't work for a federal agency, you can help the federal agencies in this way. If you are a federal agency, you can advertise programs like this in order to get work done in your case without the process of having to fund it. Another one's called MAIDEN, the Mid-Atlantic Early Detection Network. I know there's a lot of people from the Mid-Atlantic on the call today. I encourage you to take a look at this just as a good example. Okay, so next, choose your methods wisely. In the case of invasive species management, when I'm thinking ahead, I'm thinking to myself, what's going to happen with funding in the future now that the economy's down? I have to consider making sure I'm using the tools that I have to do the work right the first time. Integrated pest management, be sure the methods you're choosing are the best available out there. Make sure what you're doing, the timing, the selectivity, is good. If I come out here and I treat all this Norway maple and Ailanthus in the middle of the winter, this is what it's going to look like on the right in the middle of the summer. It's not going to work. Let's not spend money on something like this if it's going to end up like this. Let's make sure that this site is being treated this time of the year when everything's out and blossoming. We have to make sure we're doing things in a timely fashion so we're not wasting our money that we do have. It's a very precious resource. Make sure we're using the right technique. It's not just timing. We could just cut these down like I see in many, many cases in municipalities around the United States, but it's not going to effectively kill the plant because the root system is going to sucker and grow, all around these trees. So we have to make sure we're picking maybe a basal bark method where we're treating the tree while it's still alive. The chemical gets down into the root system, kills the roots of these trees. It's very selective. Maybe it's a hack and squirt method, same thing. But we have to pick our methods and pick our timing wisely. If you're going to cut a stump to treat a plant, make sure you're doing it properly. Cut it all the way to the ground. Basically, we go back to the old argument of quality. If we do a quality job on something, our costs are going to go down significantly. If this was cut 4 inches higher and not treated, we wouldn't be helping anyone. This would just create a much larger problem and much more cost in the future. Cut properly, we're going to get about a 99% mortality rate on a plant like this, autumn olive, and we won't have to come back and treat it again. So we can certainly save cost by thinking that way. The next thing we can think about is preparing for the next leaders. So if we know the economy is going down and we're not sure what's happening in the future, we need to be planning way ahead just in case we're not in that job anymore. If we care about the projects we're working on and the work we're doing, we need to have some system in place. One thing that we work with right now are a lot of new online tools that are out there. I strongly suggest that what we do in this industry is everyone puts together plans that are dynamic and useful so that if I lose my job and I can't manage this natural area anymore, there's a really good system in place that the next person comes in, they're able to use it. They're able to use the plans that are in place and not just 3-ring binders on a shelf that get ignored. I'm going to show you again really quickly an example of these. Some of the new tools that we've been putting together are called online management plans. So just taking an example of one of the clients we have that work for a land trust, these online tools allow them to take their apps, their phones, their iPads, whatever they want to use, and while they're standing in the field, build, add to, edit, delete, whatever they want to do to their management plan. So just looking at the screen in the field, they're able to add their property description, whatever they need to add in there. They're able to put their descriptions, whether it's geology, habitat, plants, animals, man-made structures, past human impacts, encroachments, etc. Management goals and strategies, short-term, long-term. Let's just say they're working on an invasives project. They've been working on one of these sites, this particular site. You can see the dynamic maps that can come up with these online management plans. You can see the species they're working on. In many cases, you can see here where the pictures come up of the plant that they're working on. You can see the mimosa. You can see how it's growing there. So while they're standing on the site and they're looking at these, at ground level, they can take these pictures, add it to their management plan. It shows up on this specific map. Anyone that's working on these will be able to look at this stuff. When they do a treatment here, they can change that management plan right there. They don't have to wait 3 years to change the management plan. It creates a really inexpensive way to update management plans, stay on track, and keep the next generation of leaders on target with the same structure in place. So it's just one example of a way that we can pass along information to the next generation of leaders. Let's start from here again. Mobile management tools, what I was just talking about. You can also convert that into online safety plans, online handbooks, different management plans, however you want to do it. That gives you something that's inexpensive and carries it to the next generation of leaders. As we look at the economy and we see that it's going into a downturn, we really need to consider a backup plan. You know, if I'm managing a natural area and I know that there's something that is very important to me, I better have some type of backup that tells me if this happens, I'm going to have backup funding available, I'm going to have backup staff available, backup labor, whatever it might be. Because, you know, if it goes south again, we're going to see more and more staffs that get trimmed. We're going to see more and more reduced hours. So we won't have the people to do what need to get done. So we need to have that backup plan. Make that contingency plan. And think in terms of if you lost 20 to 50% of your program income. If that happened, what would you do? One thing I noticed over the last couple of years working with different countries and different states is that the people that plan ahead and put together these backup plans ahead of time are the ones that get the funding when things come around. For instance, when we have some of those emergency funds that come through the government, lots of times people aren't prepared to get those funds. We hear about it on the news. We wonder who gets that money. You know, we know that the auto dealers might have gotten it. We know that someone else got it. But who else is getting it? One interesting case in Canada was someone that was talking to me about how they built their proposal for an invasive species center or in this case, another type of environmental building that would do a lot of research and development. They built their proposal up to 75%, not really knowing there was going to be any type of stimulus package. But they had that proposal ready almost, you know, they pretty much just had a quarter of it left to work on, so that when they found out that there was going to be stimulus money, they were able to finish it very quickly and have a very good product to show. And that allowed them to get that stimulus money to actually build the structure they were wanting to build. So we have to prepare the jobs that we're talking about. In our industry, we might call those shovel-ready jobs. We hear that all the time. It's the lingo we hear from the government is we need to have shovel-ready jobs. How can we keep people employed? Well, certainly in our natural areas industry, there's a lot of opportunities to create jobs like that. We don't need to plan for those jobs the minute we hear stimulus money is now ready. We need to plan for those things now so that when someday money comes available, we have the plan on the table, we can finish it and pass it on in a very quick amount of time. That allows us to rapidly respond to the work that needs to get done. And of course, another way to do this is to prioritize the projects that we're looking at. With invasive species, you might not do Japanese honeysuckle right away, but you might work on Japanese stiltgrass if you don't have any of it on your property, and you see that it's starting to come in. That might be a much higher priority than, say, Japanese honeysuckle. The next step that we can look at is enhancing your workforce. Basically, downturns in the economy give people the opportunity to get smarter. And then once the industry sees more funding, I think we as employers have an opportunity to actually be more selective in the type of workforce that we hire. I think there's become a surplus of experienced professionals to choose from. So if you're not in the workforce right now, maybe the economy has turned on you and you've lost your job, it's a good opportunity to build up your resume, work hard on your education, because when the time turns, there'll be a lot of people looking for good labor. Part of that is by working with volunteer crews. So I consider building a volunteer crew a very important piece of managing invasive or natural areas during down times. If you're a park, if you're a natural area, if you're a nature conservancy, if you're any type of group, train your volunteer crew leaders. Seek out donated equipment so that they can utilize that equipment. Get local community involved. Seek out the high school biology courses, college courses, fraternities, sororities. One idea that I've often talked about doing is building a retirement corps. How many really, really good and well-educated and just experienced people do we know that have retired from this industry, that are very willing and actually want to be out in the work field, but they don't want to have necessarily the responsibility of that full-time job? Well, build the retirement corps now. I call it retirement corps. It's like a experienced, powerful group that we can have out there working in our natural areas. And when times get tough, they will have a better idea of what they can do. They can get out there without the funding necessarily that we need to have full-time staff. So we can utilize these things now as well as when times get tough. Some interesting statistics. Estimated value of volunteer time for 2012 was $22.14 per hour. So if you look at that and say 7.9 billion hours were volunteered last year by Americans. If you think about the opportunity we have here, first of all, that number can be different, certainly. You can see the history of the dollar value of a volunteer. So obviously it goes up every year as costs go up and everything changes in our economy. You can see a volunteer hour by state here. Find your state, find the place that you live and see what your hourly rate is there. But you can also consider your own program and consider the value of a volunteer in your own program. A lot of us use volunteers, but we never put a value to them. Think about what it would cost to hire somebody to be in that position. And I think you'll see a lot of value in the volunteers that are there. So you have to really think about how we can utilize volunteers. Oftentimes we can partner, if you are not a not-for-profit, you can partner with the not-for-profit to have some of the impact that they can cause. Not-for-profit community is an enormous contributor to the American economy. Look at those numbers. 5.5% of the nation's entire GDP was from not-for-profits. And they host a lot of the volunteers, and they can work with a lot of the groups to get things done where maybe in other cases you would not be able to do that. And if you also look at it in terms of volunteering, a lot of the volunteers are the ones that donate to groups like ours, the environmental groups. So if you get those volunteers involved and interested in what you do, you'll also find another source of income possibly from donations. And when they work on projects that they think are important, you'll probably find a much better avenue for finding good intention donations for the work that you're trying to do. Utilize students. Go to those colleges, get internships. In the recession, more people tend to go back to school. So start now, create partnerships with the high schools, the universities, community colleges. Create a bunch of internships, okay? In this field, traditionally, people are not really expecting to get paid that much to do work when they're doing an internship. They know it's kind of part of the dues they have to pay. But even if you do have to pay an intern, you certainly get a lot of value for your dollar if you have a good program in place. So I highly encourage you to utilize students. In invasive species management, I kind of throw these slides in here because be careful what you ask those students and volunteers to do, okay? Don't ask them to get in there and hand pull a plant like this, okay? You're probably going to lose your volunteers. Rosa multiflora is probably not the best species if you're doing invasive species management with volunteers or students, depending on the methodology you choose, obviously. But make sure you're choosing tasks for them to do that are significant, that are going to have a very good impact on your program, but are not going to turn them away from the projects you're working on. Stiltgrass is a great plant for volunteers to work on, but if you have a population like we just saw, it'd be kind of difficult for one volunteer to deal with it. But it's easy to pull. You can have volunteers with invasive species cutting vines from trees. It's an easy task for them to do, and it's actually very beneficial for the forest. So moving on, next step, save more. Like it says there, it might sound obvious, but most of us don't do it. Let's think about how we can save, okay? If we're private individuals, we have our own businesses, or we're not-for-profit, we have the opportunity in some cases to actually put some money aside to work towards the next few years. If we're in certain government agencies and groups, obviously that's not something that we're allowed to do. We have to budget year by year, and we have to spend our budget. Well, that's where we have to bring in other options, which we'll talk about later. But we need to consider saving more. We certainly don't save enough in this country in order to think ahead into the future. We have to store reserves. We have to stay liquid. Make sure we're able to get into those funds if they're there. I put back here, let's go back, something I think is very important, friends organizations. If you're not part of a friends group, Friends of Parks group, or you don't have one for the area you work, consider what it would take to start one of these, because this can be your opportunity to bring in money, to actually plan for projects 5 years down the road with funds that we might be able to save throughout the course of the next 5 years versus hoping we get in a budget in the next couple of years. Consider friends organizations. I'll get into some more detail of that as we go along. Create an emergency fund. Make sure you're setting enough money aside to cover your expenses for a 3 to 5 year period. You might have to pick the most important projects, the ones that you prioritize as most important, and that's fine, but make sure there's some way that you're going to have a 3 to 5 year window where those projects get funded. Start now. Build that management plan. Make sure you've got a plan of action, and then go out there and try to find funding in order to sustain these projects moving forward. Don't wait until the economy tanks where you are. Take care of it now. You need to exercise patience. Make sure that you're as patient as you possibly can be, okay? You might be dying to get a new piece of equipment. You might really need to upgrade and get more staff right now because the budget seems like it's in a good place to do it, but really be cautious about doing it. Be very careful about what you buy. Ask yourself, is this $75,000 piece of equipment more important than maybe 2 salaries for crew that can be out in the field working on things that you need worked on? Weigh your options. Make sure that they make sense. Make do with maintaining older equipment. Don't just assume you need that new tractor. You know, lots of us get that itch to buy new equipment, me being one of those people. But oftentimes we can make do with what we have for a couple more years. We just have to do the maintenance costs. Make sure you're doing your cost-benefit analysis on all the tools that you have. You need to rein in the cost of transportation. Obviously, that's a big issue right now. When you buy new equipment, think about the cost of energy, okay? Think about the fuel costs that are going to be involved with that. You might decide that might be one of the factors that tells you I'm not going to buy a new piece of equipment now, or maybe I'll wait and get a piece of equipment that's more fuel efficient in the future. But it'll also help you just by thinking of the cost of transportation. You'll plan ahead in terms of your crew and your other staff and how you manage things as well. If you're thinking ahead on your costs, you're going to plan your entire program around those costs. So you're going to think of a more efficient way to hire. You're going to think of a more efficient way to have your crews working or where they lodge or whatever the issue might be. Consider that cost of transportation. One way is what we're doing right now. I can't tell you how many conferences and workshops I heard were canceled in 2013. Just a lot of expense there, and people were not getting the money they needed to travel. And the money that was coming might have been coming from debt in the first place. So if they were able to go, our debts would have just gone up even more. So many were postponed, many were canceled. One really, I love having 150 people sign up for a webinar like this. I really don't like not being able to see faces and interact, but it's very nice when you don't have to get in a plane, fly somewhere, get a hotel, go to the conferences, eat, drink, spend the night, fly back. You save all that cost by doing these webinars. So it's something we have to get used to in the environment we live in today. But I think that whether we're talking with volunteers, whether we're talking with partners in other places across the state, maybe it's a nationwide program you work with, we need to utilize more webinars. There's all kinds of options out there. You can see some of them listed on the bottom of the screen there. We're using the Citrix one today, the GoToWebinar, GoToMeeting program. Takes getting used to, but I think it's worth it in the end. So next, I hear a lot of people nowadays, and I just kind of throw this in there because I think it's important to say, secure the job you already have. Make sure you're doing the best at the job that you currently have. A lot of people are interested in moving out of the jobs they have right now, but it's really not a great time to do that. Let's consider how we can improve upon the job we have versus worrying about moving to another job at this point. Remember, no matter what you do, if you do decide to leave, make sure you're setting up your replacement with the adequate resources that they need. Need to consider downsizing if we have to. We've gone through that challenge here at my company. We've had to consider downsizing, which we've never really had to do before. But we're getting at a point where sometimes we hold on to people and things that we don't need to hold on to for so long. It might hurt us much more in the long run than it does in the short term. So sometimes we have to make hard choices. And sometimes you just need to hear, somebody needs to tell us that. So we need to consider the right time to do things like this. If you're planning any big changes, think small. make the most of the resources we already have, avoid expensive conferences like we just talked about, and if you have to, trim the staff that you can't afford. You can do that in a very good way. You can help them along the way. You can look for new projects with them, new jobs. You can keep things good. If they're good employees, it's a hard thing to do, but there's always options out there, and we can talk about it in future talks about ways that if you end up having to trim your staff, ways to help those people move forward in life. Sorry, guys that work for the government, but we really can't count on the government, and I say that when it comes to funding. We can certainly count on the government in a lot of wonderful ways when we're managing our natural areas. But when it comes to funding, we can't count on the White House right now to just have that money waiting for us. We have to come up with a way right now to avoid losing the programs we have when we know that the funding's probably not going to be there. To do that, we can cultivate partnerships. We need to really think, again, I told you I was going to come back to this. We need to think about what not-for-profits are out there, what friends groups are out there, and how can we cultivate a public-private partnership. And we need to nurture those things. Share responsibilities, transfer responsibility to the private landowner. If we're able to use that education tool we talked about in the very beginning, we can get a lot of our surrounding landowners to do a lot of the work themselves. And in fact, maybe even cross over onto your boundaries and help you with the work you need to get done. Oftentimes, the private guys are trying to get the government guys to pay for the work they need to do. Well, if we do this right, we can maybe reverse that a little bit and have them helping us out, helping the public side out. Promote that education and promote education and prevention. An example of a public-private partnership is one that we're going through right now. At Invasive Plant Control, we just moved into a property called the Hill Property. It's owned by the Friends of Warner Park, which the Warner Parks is a very large municipal park in Nashville, Tennessee. This 450 acres was getting ready to be turned into an apartment complex when they discovered that it had some old growth growing on it. So the Friends group jumped in, did a wonderful job securing the land. Once they got the land, they can see some of the nice trees that are out here. They took this property, they have a nice house, a barn, utility shed, and then the forest is all in the background there. Our partnership with them was for us to come in and now utilize this property. So we moved our office in here. We do a lot of things for them. We pay rent, we offer training for their crews, for volunteers. We work on the invasive species on their property, keep a presence on this property. I can go on and on about the benefits that this partnership's creating. On our end, it gives us a place we're only a few people that are always in one place. We work with travel teams. So we have a place to be housed, and we have a partner that we've worked for 17 years that now we're working really closely together, and it's a good win-win for both of us. We're helping them pay some of the bills down, and in return, it gives us an opportunity to utilize this property in a really neat way. Think about these unique partnering opportunities. Consider nurturing those local partnerships. I don't know long time ago, maybe 15 years ago, I was driving around with Randy Westbrooks and a couple others building state weed teams for invasive species work. So we worked out west trying to get partnerships together where, different organizations, different private-public partnerships got together, formed these groups, and eventually, had a voice in Washington. We're able to go out and get funds that otherwise they couldn't get. And in my field, it's also called CWMAs or CISMAs, Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas. So that's basically pooling resources. Sharing the cost of a weed cleaner might be an example. Sharing the cost of a project might be another example, any type of on-the-ground project. Maybe it's creating a statewide strike team that can cross organizational boundaries. A good example of a CISMA, basically just look at these guys at Yellowstone. If you've ever been there, obviously on a rainy day it's not as packed, but you can still see, even in the rain, you have so many people here. And CISMAs and CWMAs allow people to reach out to the land managers, both the land managers and the end users, to try and reach their management goals. So, basically taking our parks and our private lands and whoever we're working with, who are the end users of these properties, and by building a partnership group like a Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, we're able to actually expand our efforts a lot. We're able to work on a lot of different things, whether it's invasive species or any other type of work you're doing. We really have to consider the partnership efforts that are out there. whether we're working with aquatics, the forest, whatever it might be. There's cookbooks out there. Go to invasives.org/SYSMAs and you'll see there's cookbooks that have been developed for CWMAs and for SYSMAs. So the work has been done for showing us how to do these things. And if you're in a different part of this industry, take these books and look at them, because you can form the same type of partnership and pretty much change some of the language so that if it's fire management you're doing, consider a way that you can build partnerships more with that type of program. Or maybe it's protecting the native plants or whatever it might be. Consider these organizations for doing that. Make use of the friends organizations that are already there. There's exotic pest plant councils if you're in our field. There's friends of different parks groups if you're in other fields. If you don't have a not-for-profit friends organization, consider getting people to build one. Get out there in the community and find those interested people and see if they're willing to get one started. Usually it's just one project that the park can't do that the general public wishes they could do that helps get these programs started and these different organizations going. I'm going to use Friends of Warner Parks, the one I told you we're partnering with, as an example, because I think it shows the volunteer, it shows the fundraising, it shows all the different aspects. It kind of answers a lot of the questions in terms of what can we do in a downtime. Well, we can certainly lean towards the people that utilize the parks to help us manage our natural areas during these downtimes. So Friends of Warner Parks, you can see some of the statistics about it. They get about 1 million visitors per year. It's right outside of Nashville. It's in Nashville. It's just on the edge. 2,000 members. They do capital campaigns. They have over 10,000 school children served each year, so the education is not just going for the adults, but that next generation of naturalists. They've done capital campaigns not just for buildings, but they also have done it to actually acquire the property that I was talking about earlier. Some of the items Friends of Warner Parks funds includes environmental programs the Nature Center presents to the public, the Pen Pal camping programs for inner city children. It funds invasive plant control work in the park, maintenance plans to care for the 3,000 acres of this park. These are all funds that are not coming from the city. They're not coming from our taxes. They're coming from the not-for-profit friends group that the Warner Parks has. So this not-for-profit group is able to do a lot of things that the municipality just can't do. They can go out and do those fundraisers, and they can bring in a lot of money to do park maintenance, to do natural area work, whatever it might be. You can see just from the Friends of Warner Park in 2012, almost 8,000 volunteer hours. Just imagine what you could do with 8,000 hours of volunteer work in your own natural area. Or if you don't own manage a natural area, maybe you're someone that can be one of those volunteers. Get out there and do it. And improve the infrastructure, work on those fundraisers. Areas of concentration for Friends of Warner Parks volunteers, adopting part of the park. That can be everywhere from managing the trash to managing invasives to many, many other aspects of being on the ground. Those volunteers work by adopting a certain portion part of the park. Maybe it's a corporation in the city that brings out its employees twice a year, 100 people at a time. What could you use 100 people 8 hours a day for at a time to do? Just think about that in your own natural area. Special events, trail maintenance. When they adopt parts of the park, they're especially driven to take care of that part of the park. So when they're not even with their group, they're always looking at that area, and you're educating for the next, for the future of basically this natural area. Invasive plant management is a big one that you can utilize volunteers for. Obviously, the one that we utilize volunteers for a lot. Can use general maintenance of the park from roadways to rivers. Work on special events from parties for fundraisers to basically supporting any area of the park. They can also work on trail maintenance. So Friends Group are a really good solution to finding ways to do things in a down economy. Takes some work, takes some effort. I'd say get on it now if you don't have one. If you do have one, start working with them, because I think they're probably a tool that are often underutilized. So next we need to seek alternative funding sources. So seek out grants in non-traditional areas, get creative, find grants in other fields that complement what you're doing. So we might be natural areas managers, but it might have something to do with architecture. there's a grant out there for architecture, and you have a unique piece of architecture that allows you to get funds from an area you never even thought about. So look in creative ways for funding. Don't just think, I have to find an environmental grant. No, look for something that might complement what you're doing in some way. Pool your resources together. We talked about that. I just want to give you a real quick idea of something we do called a strike team. Now, our crews that are on the ground go around from state to state, place to place, working on invasive species projects. We've done a couple pilot projects now. One is for the Department of Defense. With the Department of Defense, our strike team basically is 3 people that go from installation to installation, working across boundaries. You know, they work for the Air Force, the Army, the Marines. They work for the National Guard. But all these people are pooling their money together so that the strike team can actually go out and do work on all their properties with this pool of funds. So by pooling our resources, we're able to get more done. In our case, we use it for invasive species management. But I want you to think about it in many other ways. If you work for the state of Tennessee or the state of Wisconsin or state of Illinois, is there a way, if you don't already have one, to have a strike team that's not just focused on invasive plants? Why can't we have strike teams that do aquatics and terrestrial invasives all in the same team? Why can't we have a team that not only works on those things but does trail maintenance, but also has a team that works on inventorying and monitoring? These people all have that same skill set. So we need to consider utilizing these strike teams for something like that. An example would be one of our crew leaders, Martin Clark. That's him there. Like it says there, it's not so pretty, but he works really hard. In 1 year, he'll go from the Hoosier National Forest, treating invasive species like garlic mustard and Johnson grass, to Arnold Air Force Base in Tullahoma, Tennessee, treating different level of species with different equipment. He also worked with the Greenwich Land Trust, I think it was 1.5 years ago, doing a survey on all their invasive species on their sites. Worked for Pittsburgh, went to Mount Washington, doing treatment of Japanese knotweed. Worked for many of the Tennessee state parks, doing a lot of things from management plans to inventories to on-the-ground management. And this is all one guy with one crew, what they can do in 1 year as a strike team. From there, he moved over to Hickson, Tennessee, and worked for the Tennessee Valley Authority. Went down to Georgia, worked on the Okefenokee Swamp, doing a post-wildfire invasive plant survey, trying to detect introduction of new species there. So just the idea of a strike team is really appealing, because if you're that state of Wisconsin and you have a lot of different groups that you work with throughout the state, and you're able to pool your money together and get a team of 4 people or more, maybe 50 people, that can cross boundaries, go across the state, and work on many different projects, you're at that point, you're creating those shovel-ready jobs. You're creating the next generation of the workforce. You're creating the education for those people that are in the field, so that when they leave that job, they understand what needs to happen as we move forward in this country. So when the economy's down and we have all these different things we have to think about, if we're working together and cultivating these partnerships, consider all these different options. Consider many more options. These are just touching some of these. Many of these are, full-day seminars that we could get into in terms of how to follow through on some of this stuff. But, ultimately, there's two more things I'm going to say really quickly, and then I'm going to wrap this up. What can we do? First, we need to be naturalists, okay? We need to train the next generation of naturalists. As natural areas managers, we need to do a really good job of this. And I'm going to say we don't do a really good job of this. How do we do that? Well, there's a lot of ways we can do it. I think one thing we can do is set up mentoring programs. Who's going to take the place of those that have already started the battle? Les Muirhoff was a good friend of mine, worked with me for a few years. This is what I got this email from him in the past. I always liked it. Sent me this picture. This is what I want to look like when I grow up. This is one of my heroes with a fellow botanizer that one of the librarians from the Gray Herbarium at Harvard sent me last week. He wants to be this guy. He wants to look like this guy. Well, you know what he was also good at? There's Les right there. He was also good at training that next generation. He was also good at sitting down with those children and letting them know and building tools for them so that when he passed away, which he unfortunately did a couple years ago now, the next generation had tools in place so he could carry on his legacy. We have those mentoring programs. We need to build them. Dr. Epley's another one. These are his Epleyisms. Worked for APHIS for many, many years. Was very important in the invasive species world. Funny gentleman, but very smart, very wise in the things he says. We need to build those mentoring programs. Here's Les working with a group of high school students at a summer camp in North Carolina. We need to reach out to these people, build mentors for them, build that next generation of naturalists. We need to spend the money on education now so we can educate that next generation. That's Chuck Bargeron. If you know his son, if you know Chuck, that's his son in front of that naturalist sign. He's one of the guys that's out there working to train that next generation of naturalists. Now, I'm going to just leave you with this, okay? I don't know. I wish I could ask you and I could get a response. How many of you have heard Paul Harvey's The Power of Art Over Argument? I find it really interesting because as industries evolve, and the natural areas industry is really relatively young. We can go back and we can look at the agricultural industry and say it's been around for many, 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 many years, obviously. But protecting natural areas, it's a really young field. But as different industries grow, there's different ways that we're successful at growing those industries. I found it really interesting, his power of art over argument. We do a lot of arguing. We try to tell people that this causes this much damage, we need to protect this environment, we need to do this, that. You know, it kind of falls on deaf ears many times because someone with a more important argument in a different industry kind of steps in and takes over. Well, his idea was very interesting. You know, nobody could have persuaded a generation of Americans to produce a baby boom, but Shirley Temple movies made every couple want to have one. Military enlistments were lagging for our Air Force until almost overnight the movie Top Gun had recruits standing in line. You know, that's art. That's the art of movie making that actually created that. Once upon a time, a cartoonist named Walt Disney created an animal character called Bambi. Look at the difference. Deer hunting dove from $5.7 million business. The year that movie came out, it went down to $1 million business. You know, whether it's a movie, whether it's a book, a fiction book, a nonfiction book, whatever it might be, if we can create the art in this natural area industry, and we can actually get out there, we see a lot more of it now. We have the different cable stations with really great shows now that people watch, whether it's National Geographic or, you know, one of the other channels that's on that people watch these really neat shows on. But we have to continue that momentum, and we have to really consider that if we can use this power of art over argument in the future, we're going to be able to take the impossible and make it not so impossible. So as we move forward in this industry that we're in, consider all these points I talked about, and let's really think about how we can work on that. I'm going to be coming up doing a presentation on that power of art over argument for our industry probably in February, so keep your eyes open for that. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. There is my contact info. Everything should be there. This, again, will be posted online. I really appreciate everyone coming today. And with that, I think what we're going to do is hold off on any of the questions, and anyone that typed in a question, those questions are going to be emailed to me directly with your contact information. I'll be able to answer those. But I think with the number of people and the crunch on time right now, we'll just hold off and do it that way. But thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope you all enjoyed the presentation. Look forward to seeing you next time.